That evening remained a mystery to everyone. A heavy hush fell over the press corps. It wasn't the usual boredom-induced silence either. It felt like a completely different atmosphere, the sort of tension that leaves an entire crowd gasping for air, anticipating a standstill in time, lenses fixed straight ahead while audio gear extended eagerly toward the stage. Facing that massive crowd, a lone figure approached the mic. That was Tommaso Chioni, the vanished lady's son-in-law. The public spent weeks demanding answers about Nancy Guthrie's whereabouts. She was an 84-year-old grandma, a devoted churchgoer who loved whipping up meals. She'd constantly ring up her kids merely to chat with them. Vanishing without a trace simply wasn't in her nature, yet she vanished anyway. As rescue crews scoured open lands holding their flashlights, Tommaso Chioni stayed completely mute. Armed with attorneys, he refused to speak. His persistent muteness put everyone on edge. Consequently, stepping up to that microphone instantly shifted the room's vibe entirely. The crowd inched closer, shutter speeds intensified. Journalists suddenly ceased their side chatter. Sorry. The entire crowd craved the truth. Did he have answers? How would he explain it? Tommaso coughed slightly, gazing across the sea of eyes locked on him. He uttered a quick sentence, "I was present that evening." Chaos immediately erupted indoors since that revelation flipped the script completely. Authorities spent months secretly piecing the puzzle together. Detectives gathered clues while stockpiling concerns. Investigators' doubts kept escalating rapidly. However, Tommaso Chioni offered zero help. No statements, no chats, just dead air shielded by legal counsel. Yet suddenly he stood before a global audience admitting his presence at the residence the exact evening Nancy Guthrie vanished. Immediately, the press mob began hurling inquiries simultaneously. Tommaso simply held up a palm, continuing his statement. He sounded unsettlingly composed, neither devastated nor shattered, but steady like a heavily rehearsed actor. He claimed a massive fight broke out. Things escalated quickly, he explained. Nancy was supposedly prepping a few adjustments, both legally and financially, moves designed to strip wealth and control right from Tommaso Chioni. Following that, he dropped another bombshell phrase that chilled the audience to their core. Someone else was present. The journalist fell completely mute as a fresh mystery emerged. Assuming Nancy Guthrie had company that evening, who exactly joined her? Plus, why did this crucial detail remain hidden until today? A female investigator jotted notes near the exit, emphasizing a line heavily. This narrative had officially moved past a simple missing grandma scenario. We were dealing with a whole different beast. However, grasping the reality of that horrific evening requires rewinding the clock a bit. Rewind past the media briefing way before any rescue crews deployed, long before the public figured out Nancy Guthrie didn't just casually stroll away. Let's return to square one to figure out Nancy's true character, since you can't truly grasp her tragic loss without realizing how incredibly special she was to her inner circle. Prior to discussing clues law enforcement isolated highways and hidden truths, we ought to hit the brakes. Discussing Nancy is essential, seeing as Nancy Guthrie wasn't merely clickbait. She definitely wasn't just a police file digit. Nor was she some random text pinned to a neighborhood utility pole during a freezing dawn. This was a living, breathing human being. Her loved ones emphasized that while Nancy Guthrie was 84, meeting her in person would completely shatter that assumption. Twiddling her thumbs and watching the clock tick wasn't her style at all. Rising way earlier than folks 40 years younger, she thrived on a schedule. Her congregation and her backyard plants kept her busy. Daily catch-ups with her kids were absolutely mandatory. She'd move mountains to make those calls. Plus, she was the sort of grandma who literally never forgot your special day. The type to pop an actual greeting card in the mailbox complete with a genuinely handwritten message inside. A lady who consistently kept warm meals waiting whenever guests arrived. To her, serving a plate of food perfectly translated to expressing her affection. Savannah, her daughter, constantly called her the family's anchor, that central figure drawing everyone together seamlessly. A reliable rock who rarely yelled, yet radiated an aura that established her as the true boss of the household. Grinding constantly since day one, Nancy successfully established a legacy, a household, a bloodline, and a deeply grounded existence. Heading into her twilight years, she took sensible, calculated steps regarding the future of her hard-earned empire. Armed with an attorney and a solid strategy, her paperwork detailed precisely the distribution of her assets down to the letter. Being reckless with her estate wasn't her vibe. Leaving messy, unresolved business simply went against her entire personality. Funnily enough, that specific trait turned into a massive focal point for this whole saga. We'll cross that bridge later, though. Imagine Nancy during an average afternoon. Perhaps she's chilling at the dining table at dawn, sipping on some hot tea. Her place stays peaceful, never isolating. Sunlight beams across the glass exactly how she prefers. She's got a packed schedule ahead. She stayed consistently busy. Though petite while sitting down, her presence never seemed diminished. She remained completely authentically herself. This lady vanished without a trace late into February 1st, 2026. Ultimately, she remains the true focus here. So let us pivot toward Tommaso Chioni. Exactly who was he? Well, he officially joined Nancy Guthrie's inner circle through marriage. Since he wed one of Nancy's girls, they legally considered him a legitimate relative, technically speaking anyway. Close acquaintances noted that Tommaso actively craved absolute dominance, and he made sure everyone around him absolutely knew it. He avoided violent outbursts or angry door slams. Instead, he operated with quiet precision, constantly needing to understand the exact power dynamic. Keeping tabs on everyone's privileges was his absolute obsession, alongside ensuring he remained the smartest guy present. Initially, this dynamic arrangement functioned quite perfectly. Relatives often clash naturally, adopting various unique dynamics. Certain individuals take charge, while others simply tag along blindly. Recently, however, an undeniable change began brewing just beneath the surface. Nancy recently sought out her attorney, asking tough questions regarding her assets, probing into the monetary oversight of specific funds, and exploring the potential fallout of altering her plans. Ultimately, she boldly chose to enact those revisions. The precise nature of these legal updates remains shrouded within active police inquiries. However, detectives ultimately formed a solid theory, piecing together crucial evidence from paperwork call logs and thorough interviews with their closest inner circle. Nancy Guthrie deliberately started restricting Tommaso Chioni's monetary privileges. She actively locked down her wealth, revoking his prior authority and shifting responsibility elsewhere entirely. Given his obsessive, unwavering need for dominance, this alarming development undoubtedly sparked some serious fury. At this exact point, the narrative turned incredibly grim. Rather than a sudden flip, the ominous atmosphere slowly thickened like looming thunderclouds gathering overhead. Anyone looking closely would easily sense the impending danger approaching. Yet at 84 years of age, living independently, Nancy firmly maintained unwavering faith in her social circle, completely oblivious that this brewing terrible disaster threatened her directly. But February 1st, 2026 approached fast. That night, absolutely everything flipped upside down. That fateful winter night kicked off peacefully enough. Somebody requested takeout, specifically ordering a pair of dinners meant for an anticipated duo. Upon the courier's arrival, Tommaso Chioni was actually already inside, a crucial detail he eventually confessed to law enforcement. He spent significant time hanging around beforehand. To any passing observer, the scene simply resembled an ordinary domestic gathering or casual supper. Merely a relative visiting a senior citizen. Nothing appeared remotely out of place, nor would it draw a single onlooker's suspicion. Behind closed doors, though, an entirely different, incredibly strained atmosphere unfolded. Sources intimately familiar with their tense dynamic claim Nancy stood fully ready to officially execute those previously mentioned estate updates, possibly even consulting her private attorney earlier that very afternoon. She possessed urgent thoughts, requiring immediate vocalization alongside crucial matters demanding official permanent documentation. These critical issues simply refused further delays. Sometime during the visit, Nancy grabbed her mobile device, dropping an urgent audio message for her legal counsel. While the precise contents of her recording remain unknown, detectives successfully recovered the digital file, quickly deeming its context incredibly vital. In fact, it evolved into a pivotal evidentiary cornerstone. Reaching out to her legal team while Tommaso lingered nearby hardly seemed like an accidental coincidence. Whether intentionally planned or not, that specific action ultimately served as a massive, glaring red flag. As hours ticked by, a mysterious event unfolded indoors. We verified this terrifying truth without relying on any eyewitness testimony whatsoever. Instead, proof emerged through a tiny mechanism, an object Nancy unknowingly harbored deep within her torso, ignoring its constant, everyday presence. Her medical implant. Nancy Guthrie utilized a pacemaker. This compact technological implant rested within her chest cavity, ensuring her cardiovascular system maintained a perfectly steady pulse. It effectively served as her ultimate safeguard, though she most likely forgot its physical existence decades ago, much like ignoring a deeply familiar pair of spectacles. It simply blended into her anatomy. Yet that miniature gadget simultaneously functioned as a tracker, constantly generating strictly timed medical records. Each solitary pulse, any minor flutter, and every sudden escalation within her cardiovascular patterns. Throughout the late hours of February 1st, 2026, those exact files captured a hidden narrative nobody present realized existed. Precisely at 8:42 that night, Nancy's pulse spiked instantly. Eschewing any gradual shift, it mimicked the violent physical reaction of pure terror or sheer agony. By 8:47, the monitor documented intense bodily thrashing. These exact motions strongly suggest someone aggressively shoved, violently tackled, or forcefully relocated her without consent. Then striking precisely at 8:52, medical experts identified a massive, catastrophic cardiovascular failure. Clearly, Nancy's heart faced severe complications. Eventually hitting exactly 9:03 that evening, the device's signal permanently flatlined. Exactly 21 minutes spanned from her initial panic until absolute quietness. 21 agonizing minutes where Nancy Guthrie suffered in isolation alongside whatever horrifying ordeal unfolded indoors. Detectives wouldn't solely obsess over the events inside that 21-minute window. Their darkest inquiry focused squarely on the immediate aftermath. Detectives pulling up to Nancy Guthrie's residence were immediately struck by an eerie, out-of-place detail. Total quiet. This wasn't the calm, restful stillness of a normal household settling down for the night. It was a chilling, empty dead air, the specific atmosphere left behind when a place has been completely stripped of life. With the main entrance secured and zero shattered glass or splintered wood, absolutely nothing indicated a break-in. The intruder didn't smash their way indoors, they just strolled right through. That pointed to one obvious conclusion. The individual visiting Nancy Guthrie on that fateful evening was a familiar face, somebody she felt safe letting inside. They might have even possessed their own copy of the house key, especially since locals next door reported zero disturbances. There was no screaming, no breaking furniture, and no violent scuffling echoing outside. Furthermore, Nancy's pet, a typical yappy little terrier that hated newcomers, reportedly stayed perfectly quiet the whole time based on statements from those who knew the family's routine well. That pup recognized the guest. While it seems like a minor clue in a massive puzzle built entirely on tiny fragments, it's huge. It proves that the figure standing inside with Nancy Guthrie was a friend to her pet, never triggering its protective alarms. Law enforcement meticulously scoured the entire property, documenting every single inch of the interior. They found the garage door left at a highly deliberate elevation, neither completely shut nor wide open, but specifically cracked to perfectly obscure the sightline from a distinct angle. Anyone looking from the road would be completely blind to activity in that driveway. Leaving it like that was purely intentional. The culprit carefully mapped out visibility lines, anticipating exactly what neighbors could witness. Then came the surveillance system. Nancy Guthrie owned a solid alarm setup featuring lenses covering the perimeter that constantly captured and saved video feeds. Basically, the exact technology meant to help relatives sleep easy, knowing a senior citizen is safe by herself. Yet, upon reviewing the digital tapes, detectives discovered missing chunks of footage and bizarre temporal jumps. The exact moments the recording equipment went dark mirrored the precise time frame Nancy's heart monitor registered extreme physiological trauma. This wasn't some random software malfunction. The network was breached from afar. The intruder signed in with the master credential, no brute force hacking, no temporary PIN. They typed the exact correct login details because they already had them memorized. Next, using a gadget linked straight to the local router, they flipped the lenses over to a diagnostic setting, a sneaky configuration that halts video capture while keeping the siren silent. Once the feed died, the tangible destruction began. A single lens had been manually yanked around and physically messed with, yet this manual tampering occurred only after the digital kill switch was thrown. The attacker understood the proper sequence: blind the system first, smash the gear second. That isn't a frantic mistake. That is a calculated strategy. Standing in those rooms, authorities could practically see the chilling blueprint of the event coming together. This was no crime of opportunity. It wasn't a sudden blinding rage where a perpetrator lashed out and fled. The killer navigated the residence with chilling, methodical precision. A suspect fully aware of every blind spot. A culprit who had the internet login saved. Somebody so familiar with the alarm network they could quietly disarm it. A person who clearly spent plenty of time hanging out there. The kind of familiar presence the family pet completely ignored. Which brings us to Tommaso Cian's deafening quiet. As cops unraveled the grim story told by the crime scene, Tommaso Cian's behavior started raising some serious red flags for the public. He did absolutely zero. He skipped the search parties, refused to join the grieving relatives at media briefings, and never held up her picture. He never bothered ringing up the detectives with useful tips either. He ignored online pleas for community help entirely. Instead, he lawyered up with top-tier defense attorneys. Hiding behind his legal team, he just shut his mouth completely. Look, we have to acknowledge an American reality. Everyone has the Fifth Amendment. Retaining counsel is a fundamental protection, and those constitutional laws exist to keep the system fair. Hiring an attorney doesn't automatically equal guilt. However, the public definitely saw the contrast. Nancy Guthrie's kid Savannah never stopped shouting. She blitzed the local news channels and showed up at every neighborhood gathering. She poured her heart out to anyone with ears clutching pictures with trembling fingers and sobbing whenever she mentioned her mother leading the physical hunts herself. She funded independent hotlines and offered up her personal savings as a bounty, desperate for a single clue about her mom's whereabouts. Nancy's remaining kids acted the exact same way. Front and center, loud and completely panicked, the unique kind of raw terror you only see in loving families, searching for a missing relative. Meanwhile, Tommaso Cian was nowhere to be found. He wasn't merely silent, he was completely missing in action. You never saw him standing next to Savannah or carrying NY's picture. The guy failed to show up at any of the public gatherings organized by the family. Folks just couldn't stop discussing the glaring difference between his complete lack of reaction and the obvious heartbreak radiating from her relatives. The locals picked up on it, buddies saw it happening, and even total strangers caught on to the weird vibe. Folks viewing the coverage from their couches couldn't shake this deeply unsettling gut feeling about the whole situation. If a loved one vanishes, you jump into action. You take steps. It doesn't matter if your efforts aren't helping. Sitting on your hands simply isn't an option. Yet Tommaso Cian didn't lift a finger. Several weeks drifted by while the hotline phones rang off the hook and rescue crews continued their daily hunts. Savannah continued to be the vocal one, whereas Tommaso hid comfortably behind his legal team, refusing to utter a single word until he finally approached the microphone. So we find ourselves right at the beginning again. Anton delivered the exact phrase that blew this entire investigation wide open. The media briefing area was packed to the brim. Journalists got a heads up that Tommaso Cian planned to finally address the masses. That rumor alone packed the house. Broadcasters stacked their lenses 3 rows thick while latecomers crammed against the perimeter. Out on the street, a crowd lingered with their cell phones out, tuning into internet broadcasts and constantly reloading media sites for updates. The highly anticipated hour had arrived. As Tommaso Cian approached the mic, he appeared noticeably altered compared to all the pictures plastered over the news. He seemed somewhat diminished and incredibly cautious, fiddling with the audio stand despite it already being perfectly positioned. After staring at his palms for a moment, he raised his gaze and opened his mouth, acknowledging that the public definitely wanted answers. He claimed his legal counsel told him to keep his mouth shut, an instruction he obeyed simply because he felt terrified and overwhelmed. He insisted he was there to clear the air, and right after that, he dropped the bombshell. I was present on that evening. The entire space fell incredibly silent, making the buzz of the overhead air conditioning unit distinctly audible. Going further, he claimed he visited NY's residence at nightfall. He mentioned that they ended up having a discussion. According to him, that casual chat quickly escalated into a heated dispute. He claimed Nancy was busy modifying her legal paperwork moves that would directly impact him, and noted that the friction between the two had been brewing for quite a while. He alleged that Nancy took a tumble midway through their fight, insisting he never laid a hand on her and just freaked out. At that point, he uttered a sentence that completely flipped the inquiry on its head, steering the whole case down a wildly unexpected path. She wasn't by herself. It wasn't just Nancy and Tommaso inside the residence. Another individual was involved. A third party was on the premises that evening. Somebody else was standing right there, a mystery figure who had completely flown under the radar up until now. Tommaso held back on sharing any specific identities while standing at the mic. He maintained that he was playing ball with law enforcement, noting that his lawyers were still hammering out the finer points. However, the bell had already been rung. The narrative instantly shifted from a simple tale of a single guy and a vanished lady. Suddenly, the focus shifted to an unknown accomplice lurking in the shadows, and authorities wasted no time jumping into action. The physical proof spoke volumes once Tommaso Cian finished his press briefing. Detectives ramped things up to a previously impossible gear, all thanks to a brand new massive break, a direct confession. He literally admitted to being on the scene. Because of that, any clues linking to the property during that specific time frame shifted from mere guesswork to hard facts. Every piece of evidence now tied directly to a guy who had just publicly confessed to being on site. Authorities took a fine-tooth comb to the entire file, taking a second look at the heart implant records. They synced the digital logs with Tommaso's confirmed whereabouts for the night, 8:42, 8:47, 8:52, and 9:03. Every single logged minute matched perfectly with the exact time frame Tommaso Cian swore he was hanging out indoors. Next up were the cellular logs. Right past 9 o'clock at night, Tommaso Cian's cell fired off a text. It wasn't a lengthy paragraph, a detailed excuse, or a desperate plea for assistance. A single phrase handled. That distinct expression hit the center of the detective's case file like a boulder smashing into a quiet pond. A chill ran down the detectives' spines when they saw it, since "handled" hardly sounds like a terrified, bewildered guy who just witnessed a senior citizen take a spill and panicked. The term gives off the distinct vibe of a guy confirming a job well done. It reads exactly like someone letting their partner know the issue is resolved. The word screams calculated, ruthless, and final. Authorities tracked the recipient's digits straight back to a burner cell. We're talking about the off-the-shelf devices you pay for in paper money, making them almost impossible to trace back to an actual person. It's the exact device criminals grab to avoid leaving digital breadcrumbs, though digital footprints usually find a way to stick around regardless. Signal logs revealed the burner bounced off a local mast right by Nancy Guthrie's block during that identical window, proving the mystery owner was lurking dangerously close to the scene. Logs from the overhead door indicated activity past 9 o'clock. Cargo got packed up. Items were shifted around. Under the cover of pitch-black darkness, a vehicle slipped away from the estate undetected by the sleeping locals. Hours prior, the alarm network captured a wireless link-up originating right from the interior of the residence. Detectives suspected this gadget provided the backdoor access needed to toggle the surveillance feeds offline. This hardware didn't belong to Nancy, nor was it tied to the property's network. The owner was an individual physically present in Nancy Guthrie's lounge, actively executing a premeditated scheme. Soon after, local network mass tracked a ping, leaving the subdivision, progressing consistently toward the municipal limits, heading for the Badlands. The surrounding wastelands outside town are totally unforgiving. It's a massive, sprawling expanse of nothingness that stretches far beyond what you'd ever expect. Daylight hours bring a brutally punishing heat beating down mercilessly, but once dusk finally hits, those temperatures plummet instantly. It's a bitter chill that catches folks off guard. Out in that terrain, you won't find any lamps illuminating the paths, zero paved walkways, and absolutely nobody around, only dirt and dry shrubs. Plus, the unsettling rustle of unseen creatures shifting in the pitch blackness that you pray is just a breeze. This is the exact spot folks vanish to when they crave complete, absolute isolation. Naturally, it's also the perfect dumping ground for burying dark secrets when someone insists they stay entirely hidden from the world forever. As law enforcement tracked the digital breadcrumbs away from Nancy Guthrie's block and into the barren outskirts, the crew lacked a clear objective. The only certainty was that a transport had occurred. Authorities confirmed a ride took this specific route past 9 on the evening of February 1st, cementing the fact that whatever nightmare unfolded inside the residence certainly hadn't ended there. Recovery squads fanned out over a massive perimeter, advancing with the meticulous pacing of seasoned professionals. Staring at the dirt, they executed precise sweeps to ensure total coverage. At first glance, the Badlands seem vacant. But then the details pop out. Initially, it was just wheel tracks stamped into the dust, crisp enough to prove they were recently made before any heavy breezes had the chance to blur the lines. Those distinct tire grooves offered some incredibly solid investigative leads. Detectives snapped pictures of the evidence and pressed onward, eventually spotting overturned dirt. One specific spot starkly contrasted with its surroundings. Naturally, the arid landscape compacts firmly as the years pass. The surface forms a hardened, baked layer over the years. Once a person disrupts that tough shell and tries flattening it out again, the obvious tampering stands out instantly. Spotting it requires a trained eye, which these experts possessed. The crew halted immediately. After flagging the site and radioing for excavation gear, the team began unearthing the plot. Their initial discovery was a swath of fabric, a bulky black industrial quilt, the exact type of heavy padding professional movers wrap around delicate couches to prevent nasty scuffs during a long transit. It sat half buried in the soil, tangled up, as if an individual aggressively shoved it into the earth under sheer panic. Digging deeper yielded the prize. A tiny boxy object emerged caked in grit, yet completely undamaged the outer shell of a pacemaker. Nancy Guthrie's medical hardware lay hidden deep in the wilderness, hastily shoved into a makeshift grave way out of town. Back at the precinct, you could hear a pin drop when the update rolled in. Pacemakers don't surgically extract themselves. They certainly don't stroll out of a chest cavity and hitchhike to the Badlands. A human intentionally ripped it free. An individual hauled it miles past the municipal lines and shoved it into the dirt, treating it like a smoking gun they desperately needed to erase. Which is precisely the reality of the situation. This apparatus wasn't merely Nancy's health aid. It acted as the ultimate silent bystander, a piece of evidence completely immune to fabricated alibis, expensive defense attorneys, or any slick PR spin. The machine stored precise chronologies and vital metrics. Ultimately, it chronicled the exact physiological trauma Nancy Guthrie endured on February 1st. The person who hid it out there clearly knew that mindlessly chucking it onto a highway just wasn't enough. Ditching it in plain sight was never an option. The suspect navigated deep into the pitch-black void, scoped out an utterly isolated patch of dirt where 0-foot traffic occurred, and systematically planted the item. Such calculated steps totally rule out a blind crime of passion, where the culprit simply blacked out. This screams of a highly rational mind actively weighing the criminal fallout, managing their clues, and acting out of pure terror of an eventual forensic discovery. Staring at that filthy piece of tech out in the wasteland, detectives realized this perpetrator was vastly more cunning than the press releases suggested. As the recovery units expanded their perimeters, finding clues was no longer the primary objective. They were strictly hunting for Nancy. As crews combed through the wasteland, detectives returned to the property for another pass. Although they previously scoured the residence, thoroughly fresh details and a completely different perspective prompted them to investigate it again. Returning to a crime scene often reveals hidden clues. It isn't that objects magically appear, but rather your mindset shifts toward the right inquiries. A detective spotted a specific object resting in the main living area. It was a voice-activated digital assistant typically perched on a table. Nancy owned one just like many seniors who rely on them for convenience. Folks use these gadgets to dial up a friend or check the local forecast. They can flip the switches while you stay seated. Crucially, these electronics save tiny sound bites once triggered. These gadgets aren't designed to constantly eavesdrop on every conversation. However, catching a specific prompt or even a matching background noise causes them to save a brief recording. These files remain on a server. Authorities obtained the saved logs from the tech company, threw on some headsets, and played them back. The bulk of the files were completely mundane. Questions about the rain verbal phone dial, prompts, daily chores, and just the ambient noise of a completely regular existence. Suddenly, a specific file from the evening of February 1st stood out. The track lasted only a handful of seconds. Detectives played the track a single time, then immediately hit replay. The audio captured a tiny, terrified, and undeniably genuine whisper, pleading just a single word: "Please." Right after that came a heavy thud, a massive impact characteristic of an object dropping or being shoved violently onto a solid floor, followed by dead quiet, then "One plea, please." That single cry marked the final documented noise Nancy Guthrie ever produced. She didn't shout an identity, utter a complete phrase, or scream loudly enough to alert the neighbors to rush over. It was merely a quiet beg from an 84-year-old lady inside her supposedly secure residence, the one place she should have been completely protected, directed at an attacker who absolutely refused to care. Please. Detectives dwelled on that haunting utterance for quite a while, particularly because it sat directly amidst the mountain of medical device logs, mobile tracking numbers, home alarm, history's unearthed plastic parts, and fresh tire tracks left out in the desert. It was far too easy to view this whole scenario as a simple game, a mystery to crack. Just dots needing to be linked. That plea changed everything. This wasn't a game. This involved a real human. This involved Nancy Guthrie, a mother who rang her kids simply to chat and mailed out handwritten notes every year, who actively tended the community church garden, followed strict daily habits, and managed to choke out one solitary gasp. Please. The detectives facing Tommaso Cian inside the interview room were seasoned veterans at this exact kind of routine. They were used to confronting suspects, trying to conceal the truth easily, spotting tiny nervous twitches, tracking hesitation before replies, and watching how a suspect's gaze shifts while inventing lies instead of recalling facts. These officers understood the immense value of biding their time, slowly presenting clues one by one while carefully observing the target's reactions across the table. They began softly. They requested Tommaso recount that night from the top. What time did he get there? What was discussed? How much time passed? Tommaso spun his tale with rehearsed precision. The guy had obviously mentally reviewed his alibi repeatedly. His palms remained unmoving while his tone stayed flat. Suddenly, detectives presented the heart monitor logs without any theatrical buildup. Nobody threw folders around or gave a monologue. They merely slid the documents forward and allowed Tommaso to process them. The chronological markers, the heart failure at 8:52, the final transmission at 9:03. Tommaso stared at the paperwork endlessly. Next, officers slid the text message logs forward across the table. Then came mobile tracking data charting the truck's journey straight toward the wastelands. They revealed the dug-up dirt coordinates alongside a picture of the medical device shell resting in its dusty tomb. Tommaso immediately lost his composure. Unmistakable panic visibly flashed across his face. The carefully constructed alibi he had been confidently feeding them began unraveling completely at the seams, much like a thin piece of damp cardboard rapidly disintegrating in the pouring rain. The narrative survived for a brief second before completely collapsing. He requested a breather, and upon returning, his entire demeanor shifted. He claimed ending Nancy's life was never part of his agenda. The suspect repeated this defense frantically, leaning over the desk, desperate for the cops to believe her death was an absolute accident. He mentioned the dispute intensified. He noted Nancy was furious, showing much more stubbornness than he ever anticipated. She was absolutely dead set on finalizing those legal modifications, and her unyielding attitude somehow poured gasoline on the fight. He claimed Nancy tripped and went down incredibly quickly. According to him, she went from standing upright to hitting the ground instantly, leaving him totally paralyzed with fear instead of dialing 911. He admitted to just hovering there for an absolute eternity, simply staring at Nancy's motionless body on her own living room rug. Rather than grabbing his cell to ring emergency services, he went another route. He reached out to a contact. He refused to explicitly drop a name. He just called the guy a partner, a reliable confidant he always relied on whenever situations went completely sideways. Once this accomplice showed up, Tommaso claimed the guy completely assumed control. This partner ultimately made the call to skip getting any medical assistance. That accomplice evaluated the whole mess and immediately treated it like an issue needing serious damage control, not a dying woman who desperately needed a quick rescue. The accomplice pointed out the risks of cops showing up, the intense interrogation they'd face, and the glaring holes in Tommaso's story he couldn't possibly justify. Handling the pacemaker was the partner's idea. Tommaso remembered him demanding they yank it to destroy the logs. Lacking that implant and its internal clock, verifying the timeline turns nearly impossible, so they just carved it out. Nancy Guthrie might have actually been breathing right then, barely hanging on to life, while her daughter's husband just froze in place without lifting a single finger, getting her heart implant torn out by guys who cared way more about hiding their tracks than saving her. Following that, they relocated her. Tommaso mentioned a transport pad sat conveniently inside the carport. He claimed he refused to imagine the ensuing horror. He stated that he relocated to another room entirely, while his accomplice took care of the dirty work. He convinced his own mind that looking away somehow made the nightmare fake. Soon after, a ride silently slipped away from the estate into the night. Out there, amid the barren wastelands beneath a freezing atmosphere, Nancy Guthrie ended up dumped at an undisclosed spot still remaining undiscovered today. Detectives took a breath, holding on to more solid clues than ever before. However, a massive hurdle remained since Tommaso absolutely wasn't acting alone, and this mysterious partner remained roaming totally free. Tracking down this mysterious accomplice suddenly became the primary focus. Tommaso basically handed them tiny breadcrumbs, just enough for detectives to begin unraveling the mystery. Once the authorities dug deeper, the entire cover-up started crumbling. That burner device catching the mission accomplished message eventually led straight to a suspect via mobile ping tracking. They didn't just find a sales slip with a signature, but rather used exhausting, tedious effort charting the device's travel history and comparing those spots against existing evidence. Detectives slowly pieced together a solid profile of whoever kept that device in their pocket. Another wireless signal popped up out in the Badlands during that specific evening, totally distinct from the network hooked into Nancy's home alarm setup. That secondary gadget registered a quick signal near those discovered wheel tracks right before powering down completely. Two distinct gadgets, two separate suspects. Surveillance video outside a shop close to Nancy's block captured a guy buying a burner with bills 48 hours prior to February 1st. The tape looked blurry yet helpful. A detective instantly recognized the distinct stride body type and coat. They remembered seeing this exact guy in old files connected to Tommaso. Mobile tracking info linked to the partner's device revealed a route that evening splitting off from Tommaso's trail at a specific junction. Following their rendezvous out in the wilderness, both gadgets traveled opposite ways. Tommaso's digital footprint headed right back toward town. His accomplice's tracker continued pushing deeper into the middle of nowhere toward another destination, an area that authorities were actively trying to pinpoint when this narrative unfolded, heavily implying an additional drop-off had occurred. Another hidden site, some unknown detail lurking out in the blackness that remains completely undiscovered. Law enforcement refused to verify their exact theories regarding that secondary spot, though the investigation's focus, the ongoing interrogations, and the drafted search orders, absolutely everything hinted that his partner hadn't wrapped up his grim tasks during that initial wilderness pit stop. An additional suspect was formally and officially named. Authorities openly announced they were hunting down another guy tied directly to Nancy Guthrie vanishing without a trace. While this person lacked formal charges, his identity was completely compromised. He remained under strict surveillance, with detectives feeling certain they were closing in. Simultaneously, Tommaso's courtroom troubles accelerated at breakneck speed. His slip-up during the media briefing, the questioning sessions, the tangible clues pulled from the sand, the implant housing that digital message, and the alarm logs were all getting compiled into a rock-solid, incredibly damning case that he couldn't possibly talk his way out of. The message confirming it was handled, detectives noted, reached him at exactly 9:11 that night. Exactly 8 minutes after Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker flatlined. Just 8 minutes. As detectives hunted the accomplice, attorneys submitted endless briefs and wilderness sweeps, dragged on a totally different tragedy unfolded outside the media spotlight. Her relatives were completely imploding. Tommaso happened to be wed to one of Nancy's daughters. This particular daughter, whose identity authorities requested the press keep under wraps for the moment, originally defended her husband. She never showed up to the media gathering. She completely skipped out on Savannah's highly publicized search parties. For a while, family acquaintances just figured she was reeling from the trauma completely buried by it all, doing her best to quietly keep it together with her mom gone and her spouse caught in a massive controversy. Yet following Tommaso's press release when he claimed, "I was present that evening and she wasn't by herself," became public knowledge and couldn't be unsaid, a shift happened. She pulled away from him. It wasn't some huge explosive thing that instantly made the news, yet their inner circle definitely noticed. The ringing phone ceased. The drop-ins ended completely. That silent behind-the-scenes backing he had prior to his media appearance just vanished. What he said ultimately alienated the final ally in his corner. Savannah's on-the-record comments shifted as well. During the initial month of the hunt, Savannah talked about her mom with raw heartbreak. Just a terrified, frantic kid clinging to whatever optimism she could. Following that media briefing, a new edge crept into her tone, something rigid and intense that transitioned from purely frantic to fiercely resolute. She quit mentioning she wished her mom would return. Instead, she began declaring she wouldn't rest until she uncovered the facts. Those are two distinct mindsets, and any attentive listener could catch the shift. Her relatives were starting to face a reality nobody desired to confront. That the hunt for Nancy Guthrie probably wouldn't conclude how they had begged, it would. That getting the facts would likely have to take the place of their true desire, which was having Nancy physically back in her own house, sipping her brew, making her usual calls, writing her greeting cards, and providing that solid, warm, yet formidable energy that kept everyone connected. The foundation of their household had vanished, and without her, everything was unspooling. There's a specific sort of agony that defies definition. It isn't quite mourning. Mourning happens when you actually know the facts. When you have a memorial, a tombstone, a specific day, and hard truths that crush you so deeply you can barely carry them, yet you still have them. Mourning has boundaries. Bereavement, despite being horrific, provides a solid foundation to brace yourself against. What Nancy Guthrie's relatives are enduring is entirely different. It's the sheer torture of being kept in the dark, of opening your eyes each dawn and having zero certainty, of staring at your screen and guessing if today brings the fateful update, of cruising by an empty lot or a random highway and subconsciously wondering the way your brain just tortures you without permission. Could she be around here? Is she here? Did anyone check? It's the torment of a lingering mystery that remains completely unsolved. And at this very moment in our narrative, Nancy Guthrie remains utterly missing. Just let that sink in for a second. Even following all that went down, the heart monitor records, the wasteland sweeps the hidden shell, the text logs, the media circus, the questioning sessions, the extra person of interest, and everything else. Every single one of those clues that aligned and tied together, building into a picture that seemed massive, highly incriminating, and almost finished, the biggest missing link remains. Nancy in the flesh. Here is exactly what authorities have pinned down. Nancy Guthrie was breathing in her residence on the night of February 1st, 2026. Her heart device verified she was there and struggling. The digital assistant recorded her speaking. The alarm network records proved there were extra individuals inside the residence alongside her. Tommaso was present. He confessed to being there. He detailed a massive fight. He claimed Nancy took a tumble. He talked about ringing up an accomplice rather than dialing 911 for medics. He recalled waiting in a different area while calls were made regarding a breathing person treating her like a mere problem to handle. Her heart device was ripped out and hidden in the sand. A heavy quilt, fresh tread marks, and a mobile signal trail leading right out of the subdivision into the barren landscape. Another potential accomplice has been pinpointed and is currently facing intense scrutiny. Authorities suspect this individual had a massive hand in the events that unfolded right after Nancy went down. They haven't slapped this individual with official charges yet, but detectives have openly declared they feel rock solid about where the probe is heading. A single-word text reading handled fired off at 9:11 that night, exactly 8 minutes post-monitor shutdown. We know these details, yet absolutely none of it reveals her whereabouts to Nancy's relatives. That secondary site is literally the only factor carrying weight right now. Mobile signal tracking revealed the accomplice's device kept traveling past that initial wasteland pit stop, pushing way deeper into an unknown area that hasn't been mapped yet. Detectives figure this alternate spot could contain the clues the initial scene lacked. Recovery crews have been combing through the nearby arid landscapes with intense precision. It's incredibly tedious labor. The Badlands are massive and they don't surrender their mysteries easily. Each passing 24 hours makes specific types of forensic clues way tougher to locate. The gusts shift dirt around. The scorching heat destroys material. Time aggressively battles the recovery teams in a deeply unjust fashion. Yet the crews refuse to quit. Every morning, they head right back out. They chase down fresh tips when they appear. They even circle back to previously swept zones if recent intel hints they need another look. These professionals handle this work simply out of duty, plus Nancy Guthrie has absolutely earned that dedication. Also, way out beneath that vast open horizon, a loving mother who maintained her yard, mailed out greetings, and constantly chatted with her kids still needs to be found. The official inquiry surrounding Tommaso Cioni continues making its way across the judicial process. Detectives have compiled a massive mountain of proof pointing right at him. The state attorneys meticulously construct their arguments to explain every single clue discovered. That takes a while. Real life isn't like a 60-minute crime show ending with a shocking confession. The whole ordeal drags along purposefully, demanding a level of endurance that Nancy's relatives were forced to learn. Authorities keep a close eye on the other person of interest, and legal orders are officially submitted. Detectives say they are closing the loop. They questioned acquaintances linked to this target while heavily analyzing their private messages. Every single week sheds more light regarding this associate's identity, plus exactly how they participated during that night of February 1st. Certain details from this tragedy really haunt your mind, especially those 21 minutes spanning from 8:42 until 9:03. For 21 agonizing minutes, Nancy Guthrie physically registered pure agony. Yet the individuals inside her own home focused their attention elsewhere, worrying about clues, crafting alibis, and figuring out ways to erase an inconvenience. Meanwhile, an ignored smart device sitting quietly over on a bookshelf picked up somebody begging. A single ultimate plea. Picture an individual methodically scooping out sandy dirt late at night, intentionally hiding a tiny gadget because they knew it held the real story. They desperately wanted those facts to remain underground permanently. Then there is that text. Just one simple word carrying a completely opposite meaning from Nancy's final spoken sound. They typed out, handled casually treating an 84-year-old church-going, plant-loving grandmother adored by her kids like some mere household chore that they finally finished and struck off a daily checklist. Nobody can ever reverse those awful actions. Tommaso Cioni made his public remarks at the microphone, which remain on the record forever. Once inside that questioning room, his practiced lies crumbled, leaving behind a raw truth he absolutely cannot retract. Detectives possess the physical proof. They have the digital logs. They recovered the hidden shell. They hold the actual audio too. But the most permanent element here remains that fatal decision cemented right around 9:03 at night on February 1st, 2026. Exactly, or maybe right before that, or potentially mere moments later, the exact second Nancy Guthrie desperately required medical aid, yet those nearby actively opted for a much darker path. That single twisted decision forms the absolute core of this entire tragedy. Rather than the initial dispute, people bicker all the time. Relatives clash constantly. Drama regarding inheritance, authority, and dominance has literally existed since the dawn of human relationships. Mere disagreements never escalate into a nightmare quite like this one. The true horror stems directly from their subsequent behavior. It boils down to how somebody responds following a terrible accident, determining if you grab your cell to dial emergency services or if you actively contact an accomplice willing to cover up the mess. Tommaso Cioni definitely made the wrong call, leaving Nancy Guthrie unfound even today. Her loving daughter Savannah hasn't stopped talking to the press during this entire search. She refuses to back down, even after everybody realized solving this case would drag on way past their initial expectations. She kept going after the media lost interest, even as the huge crowds of journalists at the early police briefings slowly dwindled away. She never quit despite well-intentioned friends politely hinting that she should probably verbally brace herself for a devastating outcome. Savannah relentlessly shares her message because staying quiet basically equals giving up, and she absolutely refuses to wave the white flag. During a fairly recent media appearance, she dropped a powerful line that really stuck with audiences everywhere. She clarified her mom wasn't simply lost. She insisted her mother was abducted. That distinction matters immensely, and she desperately wants everyone to grasp it. A normal accident is a random tragedy, while the latter involves malicious intent. Plus, the terrible fate that befell her mom was completely intentional, executed by individuals making conscious decisions, meaning these criminals must eventually face a jury and be exposed for the entire world to witness. Savannah firmly believes her parent ought to be returned properly. She shouldn't just exist as some face on a flyer, a manila folder shoved into a drawer, or merely a talking point whenever folks discuss this mystery. Her dear mom, Nancy Guthrie, the absolute rock holding their relatives together, that sweet lady who'd dial you up simply because she missed the sound of your talking. A vibrant soul defined by her flower beds, Sunday services, personalized greeting notes, an adorable pup, her morning mug of chamomile, and a rich, fulfilling existence that was fully her own. Savannah promised she absolutely isn't stepping out of the spotlight, and she genuinely means business. Anybody residing around those dry, sandy outskirts near the city limits, where the current search efforts remain concentrated, law enforcement desperately needs your assistance. Exactly. Should you have witnessed a single weird detail late on February 1st, 2026, or during that ensuing week, anything setting off your gut instinct, regardless of whether it made logical sense, like some random truck idling out of place. Maybe you noticed a glow in a usually pitch-black spot or heard noises completely out of place for that neighborhood. Please reach out. Got any details regarding that accomplice or perhaps that burner cell? Or maybe you have info on that secondary spot flagged by the mobile pings or caught wind of discussions concerning the events of that evening. We are begging you to speak up. You can share information entirely off the record. Detectives have stressed this point repeatedly, meaning no one will ask who you are. Nobody will ever force you to take the witness stand. All we ask is that you grab your cell or shoot over a text stating, "I have some details," or "I spotted something." Summer or I caught a conversation you really need to hear. Nancy Guthrie's relatives are not making huge demands here. They simply want their mom returned to them. All they want is for the full story to finally break out of the shadows, since the majority of it has surfaced. But those lingering secrets are the crucial pieces. They hold the exact location, allowing her loved ones to ultimately lay her to rest after this whole nightmare. This nightmare is far from finished. The book stays open until Nancy Guthrie gets discovered. Seeing Tommaso Cian stand trial will not close it. Indicting that accomplice will not fix it either. Even after the entire justice system plays out and delivers its final verdict, it will not be enough. Sure, those milestones are incredibly important. We absolutely need them to happen, yet they do not represent the actual finale. The true resolution is getting Nancy back. Until then, Savannah will continue raising her voice. Rescue crews are going to stay on the hunt. Detectives will absolutely keep chasing down every single lead. Those mobile pings, the exact times from her medical device, that single-word text, plus the audio captured near the pantry will relentlessly guide us toward reality. Meanwhile, way out in the Badlands, sitting beneath an entirely indifferent atmosphere, the ultimate truth is just sitting there. Expect more updates from us the second fresh details drop. If Nancy Guthrie's tragedy has pulled at your heartstrings in any way, if this nightmare has haunted you, just like it haunts our reporting crew and the deeply affected relatives who lived it, we need a single favor. Pass this around. Get this into the feeds of everyday folks chilling at home across the country. Someone out there likely holds a clue without even realizing how vital their knowledge actually is. Nancy Guthrie mailed out greeting cards to her friends, truly believing those tiny acts of kindness carried major weight. She felt that staying connected and showing people you cared was everything. Now it is your turn to connect. She is way more than just breaking news. She is a cherished grandma, and she absolutely deserves to be brought back. The tragic story of Nancy Guthrie is more than a chilling mystery. It is a profound wake-up call about the vulnerable among us. Behind the closed doors of seemingly quiet neighborhoods, darkness can fester where love should reside. Nancy was a vibrant, devoted grandmother who found joy in tending her garden and mailing handwritten cards. Yet her life was callously stolen by those she should have been able to trust the most. Her silent plea in the dark reminds us that elder abuse is a horrific reality that often hides in plain sight, masked by familial ties and dark greed. We cannot afford to look away. This heartbreak urges every single one of us to check on the seniors in our lives, to really listen to their fears, and to fiercely protect their dignity. When financial disputes overshadow human life, society fractures. Let Nancy's legacy not be defined by those agonizing final moments, but by our collective vow to be the voice for the voiceless. If you see something unsettling, speak up. Compassion is an action, not just a feeling. Hold your loved ones close, cherish every conversation, and never let the pursuit of wealth extinguish the light of human kindness.